Hello and welcome to the ALCTS webinar, using OpenRefine to update, clean up, and link your metadata to the wider world. I'm Carrie Cassio, a Director at Large for ALCTS. Our presenters today are Sarah Weeks and Elissah Becknell. Sarah is the Head of Technical Services for the St. Olaf College Libraries. She received her MLS from Clarion University of Pennsylvania and worked as a systems librarian in public and academic libraries until 2011. She's currently chair of the Technical Services section for the Minnesota Library Association and co-chair of the MARC Formats Transition Interest Group for ALA. Elissah is a Zine librarian and instructor at the Minneapolis Community and Technical College Library. She received her MLIS from St. Catherine University and has worked as an academic librarian, instructor, and cataloger since 2010. If you have questions for our presenters, please type them into the question box on your screen. Sarah and Elissah will wait until the end of the presentation to answer your questions, but type them as you come up with them. If we should go over time at the end, they can answer those questions offline, and all participants will receive the answers by email. Also, please note today's session will be recorded, and you will receive an email with a link to the recording and slides. We don't currently have a chat function into the GoToWebinar software to talk to other attendees, but if you like, you can use the Twitter hashtag ALCTSCE to talk further about today's session online. We'll not be monitoring the Twitter feed during the presentation. Okay, so there may be a slight delay, and I'm going to turn the presentation over to Sarah and Elissah.
Hi, thanks so much, Carrie, and a very big thank you to ALCTS for hosting this webinar today. Elissah and I are both really excited to be talking to you guys about OpenRefine, which is a software that we've both used in our work in libraries and have found to be very useful, and we're hoping that we can share some tips with you on how to use it and some projects that we've done so that maybe you guys can find ways to use it as well. So what is OpenRefine? OpenRefine used to be known up until March of this year as Google Refine, so please forgive us if we happen to slip into calling it Google Refine at any point today. It's been a little hard to get used to. But OpenRefine is a free open source tool for cleaning up large data sets. It can also be used to create linkages between metadata sets. And we're going to talk about both of those uses today. I'm going to talk a little more on the side of using OpenRefine for cleaning up data, and Elissah's going to talk a little bit more on the side of using OpenRefine for linked data purposes. So OpenRefine can match and merge messy data filled with random spaces, stray punctuation, typos, odd capitalization, and more. It is a desktop application, which means that you'll need to download and run it locally. And you can do that from their main website, openrefine.org. A couple things to be aware of. I've talked to a number of people who, when they go to download and install it, run into blocks on their own system. And sometimes you may need to get someone from your IT department if you need administrator privileges to download certain types of applications, because it is a pretty powerful application. And so some people do run into problems that way. But if not, otherwise it's very easy to install it and run it. One other point I would mention, I most frequently don't use it on my own computer because if I'm processing large sets of data, it can it can sometimes take a couple hours, and it can slow down other processes on the computer. So if you have a student computer or a volunteer computer or something like that to install it on, that might be a better fit. So the project I'm going to talk to you about today that we did at St. Olaf College involves our Nordic American Imprints collection. And that's a special collection that we have down in our special collections area here at St. Olaf. They are books that were published between 1840 and 1940 in the United States, and specifically in cities that were settled heavily by Scandinavian and Nordic immigrants. When we, this collection is developed, over decades here at St. Olaf, mainly from, librarians as they handle books, as we take in donations, sort of recognizing, oh, I know this publisher, this is a Nordic American imprint, or oh, I know the city, and this thing looks sort of, it's about Norwegians or Scandinavian Americans, that kind of thing. And so the book sort of trickled in over time, and it was definitely a scattershot collection that we had down in our vault. About 2,500 items. And we had worked to identify what were the most common, well, actually all of the publishers of these items, and we came up with, there's over 500 publishers that published the 2,500 items in our Nordic American imprints. And we also came up with a list of, here are the cities that we're most commonly seeing these materials from. So what we wanted to do was to examine the publication info of the books that were not in special collections but up in our regular stacks to see if we might have any Nordic American imprints, that were just out there circulating in our regular collection that, were Nordic American imprints we would want to add to our special collections. So in order to do this, we would want to look at both the publisher and the city of publication. And this was, as we were trying to work on this project, it was really hard because, that information is not controlled in the MARC record. And that's fine, that the 260 is meant to be transcribed, but what it leads to is that we see many, many different variations of publisher names or city names, different spellings, abbreviations spelled out or not, ands versus ampersands. And so it was really hard for us to narrow down and try to find these things. So this is where OpenRefine came in. So in order to use OpenRefine, you'll need to have your data or your records or whatever it is you're working with in a spreadsheet. And so I know every ILS is different, but hopefully yours has some way that you can get records out and into an XML format. Or at least certain data points within the record, which is what we did. We exported the information that we needed. And what I'm going to talk to you most about today is the 260 subfield A, the city of publication. So as long as you have a spreadsheet, you can open OpenRefine, you can click Create Project, and then upload that spreadsheet. One of the very first things you can do with any spreadsheet then is to use what they call common transforms, and you can remove all leading and trailing white space. And those are those annoying spaces that sometimes come into different fields. If someone accidentally types a space at the beginning or the end, somebody accidentally types 2 spaces instead of 1. We notice it happening a lot as people may copy and paste something into a record. Sometimes it comes across with an extra space. So for this project that we worked on, we had over 36,000 records, and removing all of the random white space out of those fields took just a few seconds. The next thing we did then, and this is where I think it gets really exciting, is you click on the column, the data points that you want to work with. You're going to click on Edit Cells and then Cluster and Edit. And what this does is it takes all of the very similar values that are in your records, that are in your rows, and groups them together in a way to say, it looks like, to OpenRefine, that these might all actually be the same thing, and it's asking you if you want to merge them. And so this is where I think it just gets really exciting, because this initial match and merge is super quick. All you have to do is click Select All, and then Merge Selected and Recluster. And immediately, like all of these different variations of the example I have here, Minneapolis, Minnesota, they are automatically all changed to the most common term that OpenRefine has found in your data set. So in this case, Minneapolis, comma, M-I-N-N, period, space, colon, is the most common. And so all of those other variations are going to get changed to that. And if I didn't want that to happen, if I wanted to change it to something else, the white boxes over on the right-hand side, you could type in something and then it would change everything to that. But for this initial pass, if you're dealing with a large data set, most of the time you're just going to want to select all, merge them, and then move on to looking at the trickier things. So the default method of merging is called fingerprint. And we can change the method and the function up here at these boxes at the top. Fingerprint is definitely the most reliable method, and you can see here the kinds of things that it catches. So it's catching, the sort of random punctuation, if there's brackets or question marks or percentage signs. You can see it at the one at the bottom if there's differences in capitalization. The one in the middle, Leipzig and Berlin, you can see that it will find if the same words are there but switched around, it will merge those. The next function to try is called ngram, and ngram fingerprint. And so if you change that up at the top in the keying function box, you're going to get different kinds of matches. And so this will find things that we weren't able to find with the regular fingerprint method. But it also means that you might find here that there are some matches that you didn't want to have happen. So at this point, this is where you're going to start wanting to at least scan through these and see if anything sticks out as being out of the ordinary. So you can see it's changed Paris, IIS, not sure what happened there in Paris. It can recognize that those are the same thing. Philadelphia and Philadelphia are the same thing. But you'll also see, looking down at the fourth example here, that there's a bad match. It wants to match Portland, North Dakota and Portland, Oregon. And obviously we wouldn't want to do that. So, what I usually do is still click that merge or select all, and then go through and just uncheck the boxes for the ones that you notice are bad matches, and then merge the rest. Another example of a function is called phonetics, and with the phonetics, this was really useful for our data because we did have a lot of transliterated and translated text, and this can find things. It can know that sometimes a C sounds like a K and sometimes a K sounds like a C. So you'll see, Christiania, which is, it's a name for Oslo, is sometimes spelled with a K and sometimes spelled with a C. And so that wouldn't be caught by some of the other methods, but is caught by the phonetics method. So there's, just like before, you also have to watch out for false matches with the phonetic functions. So for example, we see some good matches here, and then I see, towards the bottom it wants to match Duluth and Toledo. And I'm still trying to figure that one out. I don't know why they would sound like each other phonetically, but you do want to go through and check. Another method is called nearest neighbor. And this is sort of forcing OpenRefine to make a match even when it might not otherwise. And so this is where it can get really, really slow and bog down your system. And so you might need to set it to work for an hour and then come back. But it's essentially saying, what is my nearest neighbor, and can I try to make a match that way? And so it's comparing every single record to every other record in the set. And so it is slow, and there are more false matches, but it's also sort of like the last step in catching those sort of odd ones. And as you use that method, up at the top you'll see a radius box and a block characters box. As you set the radius higher and the block characters lower, it will generate more matches, and so more false matches as well. We'll move the other way to have less false matches, but less matches overall. So after going through all those methods, I recommend that you run the fingerprint and ngram methods one more time, because as you merge things, sometimes you end up with things that were sort of fixed through one method or the other, but weren't yet compared to each other. So I usually find a few stragglers when I do that. And then the last thing I would do here is trim the white space again. So again, as things have been matched or merged, there might have, something might have been removed, and then an extra space could pop in there. So I think that's just a good last cleanup step. So once we've done all that, we need to be aware that things that weren't clustered and matched won't have been looked at all. So for example, in the screenshot I have here, Wilmar, Minnesota, it still has a colon in it. And that's fine, We may have removed the colon in one of our other processes, but because because maybe all of the Wilmar Minnesotas were exactly the same, they didn't show up. In cluster and edit, we might want to go through and change some of these by hand. But we don't have to change punctuation by hand. We can use transform and then use regular expressions. And if you don't know what regular expressions are, there's many good tutorials if you just Google that term. But basically, you can very quickly say, I want to remove brackets or question marks or colons or periods or whatever, and just take all of that out of your data. So then you can click on your column facet and go to text facet. And this will show you all of the unique values remaining. So in this particular case, the city of publication, we started with 3,230 unique values. And you can see here after going through all of those steps, I'm down to 1,185 unique values. So it's about a third of what I started with. And so it's a lot less to have to scroll through and deal with. And you can see I'm not seeing things that need to be merged. I pretty much found all of those. But what you might want to do, depending on your data set, depending on what you're doing, you may want to sort of rename some of these data points. So for example, if I didn't like Stoughton, WIS, and I wanted it to be Stoughton, WI, I can click on that term in my facet. I can type my new term, apply, and it will change it in all 10 records that currently have Stoughton, WIS. And so it's just a really quick way to do that. Other cleanup that we did, similar to this, we cleaned up publishers, gift notes. This was a favorite of mine because we had, over time, we just had a lot of, people would just type out a note about who had given us a book in a certain field in our item records. And so, we ended up, we have that one professor who is Laverne Ripley, and you can see we had about 20 different versions of his name. Laverne Ripple, Laverne with an E at the end without an E, capitalized or not capitalized, etc. And so, going forward, we wanted to be very easily able, if Laverne Ripley came to us and said, what books have I given you, we wanted to be able to pull that information out and not have to search every possible version of his name. So that was an interesting project. These methods would also work for numbers and dates. And so the end result, we used OpenRefine. We were able to reduce the 3,230 unique values for city to just 1,153. For publishers, the 260 subfield B, we went from 11,342 down to 6,500. And this project helped to identify over 2,000 candidates for our North American imprints collection, which is, as I mentioned, we only had about 2,500 to start with, so that was a pretty substantial find to be able to locate all of those materials in our stacks. And not all of them, actually made it into the imprints. They, some of them were not chosen for various reasons, but we did add about 1,300 books to our special collections as a result of this project. And going forward, we're hoping that the publisher names, cities of publication, and dates, that we'll be able to add that back into our records. We haven't done that yet, so this whole project happened external to our ILS. But what we'd like to do is, now that we've done the cleanup, add some of that information back in just to a local 9XX field so that we can use it for faceting in our future special collections discovery tool. So we imagine that users will now be able to browse our North American imprints collection and other collections as we choose by publisher, city, or state. So if they want to see just the books we have from Duluth, for example, that would be a facet, and they'd be able to look at them because we have controlled them. And so speaking of controlled vocabulary, our project was done, again, external to the ILS and done primarily matching the publisher names and the city names to their most common versions in our own data set. So we didn't have a preferred list of preferred forms for cities or publisher names, etc., to match against. And we certainly didn't have a list that would be available as linked open data. But going forward, we would like, to have a list like that, to have preferred names for publishers, for example, so that we can add them to our records, as I said, and create controlled access points. So that brings me to Elissah's part of the presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to her.
Hi there, my name is Elissah Becknell, and I'm a librarian at Minneapolis Community and Technical College Library. And I'm just going to kind of piggyback on what Sarah's been talking about and kind of interject my own little project that I did in collaboration with about 6 to 9 other people, depending on whatever month, because this happened over the course of a few months. And we called ourselves the Twin Cities Zine Linked Data Working Group, kind of a big name. But to kind of give you an idea of the project, at Minneapolis Community and Technical College, we have a zine collection. Zines are a self-publication. Typically, their content is out of the mainstream, and you can see here a picture of one of our zine-making events. And because they're so kind of random, we tend to catalog them with an in-house standard, which we've migrated over to Dublin Core. So it's a pretty simplified metadata set that I'm working with. Kind of the inspiration for my linked data project came when I was really trying to think hard about our subject authority, because we didn't have a subject authority. But a zine collection up in Halifax, Canada developed a really great subject thesaurus. And it's really great at describing zines because it uses terminology that's a little more modern than, say, Library of Congress subject headings. And because it was developed around zines, it has a lot of these non-mainstream ideas. And you can kind of see some of these terms like ableism or ghost towns. It just includes terminology that's really good for describing a zine collection. I talked to the librarian up in Halifax. Her name is Amanda Stevens. And she allowed me and my working group to take her zine thesaurus and make it a linkable thesaurus. So I'll talk a little bit about how we did that, and then go back to OpenRefine and talk about linking my metadata, my zine metadata, to this now linkable subject thesaurus. So in order to create a linkable subject authority, we had to put the thesaurus somewhere and have kind of that infrastructure behind it that would make it linkable, have it URIs or SCOSes. And what we used was a kind of a free tool called the Open Metadata Registry, which allows you to publish metadata schemas. And as you can see here, our schema is the Anchor Archive Subject Thesaurus. And what's really great about the Open Metadata Registry is that it's kind of designed for controlled vocabularies. And you can see kind of the beginning of our terms here, abandoned buildings, all the way down to zoos. We put them all in there. And for each concept, each term, we are allowed to match or map all the relationships. So I'm allowed to link here abandoned buildings to some related terms, ghost towns and urban decay. I could also have broader terms, narrower terms, scope notes, and of course there are preferred labels that I'm allowed to put into the actual schema. So our group did this for all of the terms in the vocabulary. And it was a little time consuming, but the advantage here was then Open Metadata Registry created a SCOS framework behind our controlled vocabulary. And SCOS is really just, it's a web standard where it creates a URI framework behind the controlled vocabulary. So as you can see here, there is a way to download a SCOS file from the Open Metadata Registry that I could use to upload to OpenRefine, and make a linkable subject authority, or link my data to this linkable subject authority. So I'm going to show you those steps in OpenRefine. Now, Sarah kind of explained that OpenRefine is an open source tool. I also just want to point out that I learned a lot about OpenRefine and about linking data from this really great website called freeyourmetadata.org. And so if you're really interested in kind of a step-by-step approach to learning how to use OpenRefine and learning how to link it, freeyourmetadata.org does a great job. They are linking to Freebase, which I think Sarah will talk about right after I'm done. So what we did was we didn't link to Freebase, we linked to Open Metadata Registry, and the process is slightly different. Okay, so using OpenRefine to link. First, you have to start by putting all your metadata in OpenRefine in a spreadsheet form, like Sarah was explaining earlier. In my collection, mine's a much smaller data set. I have 5,000 zines, or about 5,000 zines, and you can see that the data is in there right now. The other thing you have to do in order to create linkable data is you have to make sure that you have the RDF extension. So it's an extra little bit of time to get that extension put into your OpenRefine. You have to download another thing, an extension. But the directions are in freeyourmetadata.org. So please be sure to look at those steps. They're very helpful. Once you have the RDF extension and you have your metadata in OpenRefine, you start by creating a reconciliation service. And if you have a Sparkle endpoint that you're linking to, you can do that. But I'm going to show you using an RDF file or that SCOS file that I downloaded from Open Metadata Registry. All right, so I give my reconciliation service a name, and then I upload my SCOS file here. You can see it in the middle, file details. And then in the label properties, I make sure that I tell OpenRefine that this is a SCOS that you are making the links to. All right, and then once you've set up your reconciliation service, you just take the column of the data set that you want to work with and you start reconciling. So I wanted to match my subject headings in my Zine data to the Open Metadata Registry's Anchor Archive Subject Thesaurus. So I select them as my reconciliation service. And OpenRefine has this wonderful, the default is to auto-match candidates with high confidence. And I highly recommend it because it will not only look for exact matches, it will look for near matches, which can be really useful because I'm starting with a data set that is an in-house standard, and I'm kind of linking to a data set that's slightly different from mine. Okay, and then once you've selected the service, you can just let OpenRefine run. And Sarah and I kind of collectively call this the go get some coffee step. You can see that OpenRefine here is trying to reconcile my subject headings to the Open Metadata Registry. But once you've waited the correct amount of time, you get links. So as you can see here, I've got these beautiful blue links that are linking my metadata to OpenRefine. So animal rights here in my data set is linked to the animal rights in the Open Metadata Registry. Now, if I really wanted to link multiple subject headings, I'd have to parse out my data a bit better. In this example, I have multiple subject headings in one field of one column. I probably want to parse them out to have each subject heading in separate columns in order to make this look better. But the nice thing about this example is that I can show you if you have multiple matches within a field, OpenRefine will make them all one particular subject heading. So all of these things that were in the first column, animal rights, media, zines, OpenRefine found matches that were animal rights and zines. And I selected animal rights. And it's matching that one particular field for me. Beyond that, the other thing that I can do is I can do multiple similar cells at the exact same time. So for any column or for any field that has animal rights / media / zines, I can make all of those become just animal rights. So it's this powerful tool that not only allows you to make the linkages, it allows you to kind of clean up your data at the same time, which can be really useful. All right, I'm going to give you back to Sarah, and she's going to explain how to set up a Sparkle endpoint for linking.
So I know I am personally super excited by the work that Elissah is doing and what she just showed you with the Open Metadata Registry. But I wanted to talk to you about somewhat easier way to just sort of test the waters of linked data using OpenRefine that I think is really fun and interesting and maybe can be useful in your work. So OpenRefine, the history of it before, before even it was Google Refine, it was a product that was developed as part of Freebase. And Freebase is a big open linked data repository out there on the web. It's very similar to DBpedia, which is the back end of Wikipedia. So it's this big data set that has a whole bunch of information about all kinds of topics. And they were the ones that originally developed the OpenRefine product as a way to sort of connect with their big data sets. And then when Google bought out Freebase, they took over the development of this product for a couple of years and have now sort of released it back into the wild, as it were. But it still retains its original connection to Freebase, and so that's a really interesting way to sort of play around because it's already built in. There's nothing to download or install. So just like Elissah just showed you, I'm going to choose my column, and for my example, I'm going to stick with the city and state. I'm going to click the drop-down, go to Reconcile, and start reconciling. And here on the left, as soon as you install OpenRefine, you'll have this Freebase reconciliation service. And that's a default service that you can use, and it's connecting to the data sets that are out there in Freebase. And I think it's really neat, depending on I believe on your column names, it can sometimes actually even guess what it is that you're trying to match against. So in my case, it knew right away that this was a city, town, or village, and so I didn't even have to scroll through that list to say, oh, I want, these are towns that I want to match against. And so I'll show you in just a minute where you can get the list of all the data types that are available in Freebase if you want to play around with this. But for now, I'm just going to, we're just sticking with the city, town, and village. And I've kept auto match candidates with high confidence checked. And I'm going to click Start Reconciling. And get my coffee. I have quite a few more records. And the more records you have, the more coffee you're going to need to get. So you'll see over here that out of my 36,000 records, 29,241 were auto-matched. So it knew, remember, I probably had Minneapolis, comma, MI, and N, or whatever I had changed those to. It knew that that was Minneapolis, and so it's auto-matched, and that is now a live link to Freebase. In some cases, however, it's not able to auto-match, and so I can do those by hand. But I don't have to go cell by cell. Instead, what I can do is I can, as Elissah just showed, I can click the double check marks, and whatever I choose, it will change it for every single cell. For example, that's Chicago, Illinois. It will change that to Chicago. So I don't have to go through every one. And what's neat when you're doing this with Freebase is you can actually get a little preview when you hover over or click on the name. So the name may just say Madison, and I'm not sure which Madison. If I click on it, a little preview comes up, and I can say, oh yes, this is the Madison that I meant. I'm going to go ahead and change all the cells. In some cases, for example, Copenhagen, it didn't auto-match anything in Freebase because it's a little English language heavy. So, but I know, okay, that's Copenhagen, so what I can do is I can search for match. I can start typing in Copenhagen. It pops up. I'm going to see the little preview window, and I'm like, oh yes, that is the town that I meant, and so I can match it. So once you've matched everything, and this is, I think, really the funnest part, is you can click on your column that's now been matched. You can go to Edit Column and add columns from Freebase. And that's going to do just what we said. It's going to give you a list of properties that you can create a column from information in Freebase and bring in that information. So in this case, because I have cities, I chose time zone. And because Freebase has the time zones for all of those different cities, it's going to bring that up, and it's going to create a new column in my data that has the time zones that it's brought in from Freebase. And I could do the same thing, say, with zip codes or population. And so depending on, the data that you're working with, if you're working with people, you can bring in, birth date or death date or occupation, that kind of thing. Keeping in mind that, while Freebase has a lot of information, it's certainly not all-inclusive. So there will be some gaps, but I think it's just a really fun way to start playing around with linked data and thinking about what this would look like going forward. That all I have is one piece of information, the city and the state, and I can link to other information about that topic and bring it back into my data. So I said I would tell you where you can see what properties are available in Freebase, and that is at schemas.freebaseapps.com. And so you can, every property has inherited properties and then sub-properties, and you can see sort of how data sets are arranged in Freebase and what kinds of data you can get out. So that is it. Thanks for listening, and I believe Carrie's going to let us know what some of the questions were.
Yes, if anybody has questions, please type them into the box. As we're waiting for some questions to come in, I had a couple of questions. When you say you have to get a cup of coffee for 36,000 records, are you talking 5 minutes? Are you talking 15, 20, 30 minutes? What have your stretches been for processing some of these things?
I would say I'm not sure that I've ever had anything take more than like an hour, although it's sometimes hard to tell because I've, and Elissah says hers is about 20 minutes is probably the longest that she's had. I sometimes will set something to run and then go home for the evening, so I'm not always totally sure. It's long enough that you'll want to take a little break, but not so long that, you have to schedule your day way ahead of time.
Okay. We do have a question. Somebody would like to know if there's a DBpedia, excuse me, I'm not sure if I got that right, conciliation service. Are you aware of that?
I've actually played around with trying to link to DBpedia, and I have not yet been able to do that, but I am sure that, others smarter than me will be able to figure that out. They do have, I'm looking at Elissah here.
I think you can use the, sure, I can take it. Hi there. I think you would want to download the RDF extension and perhaps set up a Sparkle endpoint to maybe make that kind of a linkage. And you can look at those kinds of directions at freeyourmetadata.org. They actually, I think they use Freebase as their example. Oh, do they use LC? Okay, if they use LC, then I think they are setting up a Sparkle endpoint.
Okay, great. There's a couple of questions that are kind of similar here. Okay. So putting this back into your ILS, you did mention maybe 9XX fields. What's your next step? How do you envision loading these back in? What software would you be using? What sort of match points would you be using?
What sort of software and what sort of match points to get this data back into the ILS? Well, I can tell you that for my data, which is the Zine data, we have a very homegrown system for managing that data. In fact, it's really just like Google Fusion tables, and then we built Google API over it to create the database. And so we're kind of working with this idea that we might be able to use these linkages in some ways, but we have to build it. And so I think it might depend on the capabilities of the ILS you have, if there's even anything built into them that can use this data in a way. Some things that I was thinking of for zines, it would be really cool if I could get auto updates of my zine subject headings. Or other things, if I could get, there's a zine wiki out there, and the zine wiki has author information, zine authors, which is really unique and weird information. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if like this Zine Wiki's data would kind of come up as maybe a side panel in my database? And that would be really cool to look at. So I think either at least for me, we would have to build those capabilities in. But I'm going to give it to Sarah because she has some thoughts.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think as far as getting it back into the ILS, that's going to be different for every ILS. But once you have those URLs, because for those of you who know anything about linked data, there's always a URI involved. So there's always a URL that specifically represents, say, Madison, Wisconsin, or whatever Zine subject authority term. And once you can, once you have that in your spreadsheet, you can use MARC edit or whatever to sort of put that into, back into MARC records, load it back into your ILS, and then hopefully, like what we usually do is just put it in a 9XX field that we sort of make up, if you will, because obviously the MARC record doesn't always accommodate these things. But once we have it in there, we use ViewFind for our discovery tool, and that's an open source product, and it already has, I'm not aware of anyone using it for linked data needs in particular, but it already has APIs built in, for example, to bring in author biographies from Wikipedia, or I think maybe reviews from
Amazon.
Right, yeah, I was just going to say book covers and reviews from Amazon. So, I think in the very near future, once we have those URLs in there, we could bring in information from whatever source, not into the ILS, but through ViewFind so that it's available for the public to see.
Okay. Going back to talking about the different reconciliations and different kind of subject sets, is there a specific way to hook up Sparkle endpoint to a Sparkle endpoint to a new data set such as DBpedia? How would you? Are there instructions for that somewhere?
Again, I think the best the best tutorial that we've seen is the freemetadata.org site, but there are other tutorials if you want to look at them at OpenRefine.org. If you go in the documentation section, there are various, everything from Word documents to PowerPoints to whatever. Anyone that's made a tutorial it will usually end up there, and that's a really good place to look if you're trying to do the more technical things with the product.
Okay, back to some of the questions about how the software works. Will it only work as a spreadsheet that you're downloading and putting through OpenRefine, or can it work and be pointed at an active database?
It's only going to work for information that you get into a spreadsheet, into an XML spreadsheet.
Okay, and are you aware of any maximum number of rows that it can deal with in those spreadsheets? Other than taking an hour to process.
Well, I'm looking at Elissah. She and I have not reached any any such maximum. I would say you're probably going to be hampered by Excel. I think maxes out at 1 million rows before you would run up against something on the OpenRefine.
And you might just consider how long it takes for your computer to process.
Yes, and Elissah's pointing out that because of the time, the processing time involved, if you have, if you're talking about hundreds of thousands of records, you may want to break it into smaller chunks.
They're just cleaning up or looking for anything.
You're right.
I'm sorry, could you repeat what Elissah said?
Oh, she was just saying, in order to do the cleanup and linking processes, it might be better to stick with maybe a couple 100,000 records.
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody did comment that they thought they reached a limit once of 125,000 rows, so your mileage may vary, but that is the upper limit that somebody who's on the call today has gotten to.
Oh, great.
Can you explain a little bit more by what we mean by Sparkle endpoint and the linked data? What is Sparkle?
Oh boy, what is Sparkle? Sparkle is just so if you're familiar with what an SQL database is, it's just sort of the most standard way of creating a database. And their databases are created in a sort of uniform way so that people can query them. So that, if I know what the names for all of the data elements in my set are, I can query the database and say, give me all of the, X that are related to Y, etc., and I can pull information. So it's very similar to when you think about, like, you know, if you have a website or an application or a discovery tool or whatever that might be bringing in reviews from Amazon, they can do that because Amazon's putting their data out there in a standard way, and so we're able to bring it back in. And so Sparkle is just the sort of default way of, you know, I think in the linked data community of structuring your data so that people can grab it and bring it back. Do you have anything to add to that, Elissah?
No, I think
Okay, she does not.
And when you're creating these links within OpenRefine to this linked data, does it then just live in your OpenRefine spreadsheet? Or do you have to export it back into your own system? And when you do, are those live links?
So, you know, I think that they are, I think this goes back to the question of, you know, about getting the information back into your ILS or into other uses. You know, the links, once you have them, they're not, you know, they're not going to dynamically update anywhere else. There's nothing magical about a URI that makes it live. Where it becomes live is where you can put it into an application, you know, where it is querying that real time. So, you know, if
right. So
here, I'll hand the hand the headset to Elissah.
okay. Hi again. So what I was just going to say is, so if you think about the Anchor Archive subject authority that I put in the Open Metadata Registry, that is static. And those relationships between all of my controlled vocabulary, they're there. And if I create the linkages first off, so when I created those linkages in OpenRefine, those links are made, and then I put them back into kind of our homemade database, my tech guy and I would need to build the API in order to keep that query auto-updating, but there would be a lot of power in having that kind of an auto-updating ability so that if I change a term in the Anchor Archive subject thesaurus and Open Metadata Registry, it will auto-update my database. But we would have to build that capability. Does that help?
Yeah, so at this time you would actually have to export the data again, go through OpenRefine, update it, and bring it back in.
Right now, that's what I would have to do. But if we build the kind of API that could query Open Metadata Registry, then that would be continuous.
Great. There's some questions about the community. Is there a user group or email list that's out there for the OpenRefine product?
Is there a community around OpenRefine? I mean, yeah, there is. If you go to the OpenRefine website, you will see that there are, I mean, there's discussions that go on. There's a lot of information and tutorials, like Sarah was saying, lots of PowerPoints and things to look at. So yeah, there's kind of a community. I guess we're part of it in our own weird way.
Okay. And somebody else wants to know if you actually had a contact at Google to start up with this, or you just learned this all on your own through the community?
Oh, we just kind of learned it on our own. You just learned it on your own too? Yeah. I mean, I had done it with my friends up in the Twin Cities, and Sarah had kind of joined our group for a little bit too. We call ourselves the Twin Cities Zine linked data group, but really we're the Twin Cities linked data group because we have other ideas about maybe how we want to experiment further with linked data. But I don't know, we had all met at the Minnesota Library Association conference, which is really nerdy, but I think you just find people who are interested. Also, Sarah Ring, at least for people who are in the Midwest, Sarah Ring, she's at Minitex, right?
Yes, she is.
Yeah, so she started an Upper Midwest linked data listserv. So people could maybe, if they really want to know, if they want to keep up to date with some kind of a community, when they look at Google,
It's a Google group.
yeah, it's a Google group, so you could maybe look that up and join. Even if you're not in the Upper Midwest, I think you could join.
Yeah, Sarah's pretty nice, so.
Yeah, I think she does too.
Okay, are there additional questions? I think we're winding down on some of them here. I'm just looking at the list again to make sure I got everything. Have you been able to show this to other colleagues at your institution? Have people seen the work that you've done with this and thought, wow, that's great, and found other ways to put it to use? Are you now the experts?
Boy, okay, so at my institution, I don't think there's we're a very small library, so I haven't really talked much with I've shown other librarians at my institution and I've worked with my IT guy, but no, we're not really doing a whole lot as an institution with linked data. Are you doing a lot? Yeah, Sarah's not doing a whole lot either. I think we really kind of nerded out with our linked data group, and we're trying to figure out ways to kind of bring this to a bigger project. We've been tossing around ideas like maybe making like the Sandy Berman catalog, how he had he cataloged for Hennepin County Libraries, and he had a bunch of great, weird ways of cataloging. We thought maybe turning that into linked data, or maybe doing a Minnesota place names authority and making that linkable. But I feel like this is kind of a fledgling thing. It's not big yet, but we're just kind of starting, experimenting and playing.
So that would be going back into something like open metadata and entering all of that yourselves?
Yes, I think so. Though I think we might be able to do some more batch uploads with it. I think this is data that's maybe, we could do batching with the, well anyway, that's a little technical. It might be less work, but it might be just as much work. I don't know.
Okay, well, I don't see any additional questions. Sarah and Elissah's contact information is on the screen there. So I will take control back. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, so I want to thank all of our attendees as well I hope you found today's session useful. I know some of you have been using Google Refine or OpenRefine in your institutions. Hope maybe you learned some new tips and tricks here today. You'll soon receive a short online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to respond to that. And your comments always help the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee plan new offerings. I'd like to thank Amy Lana and Carl Hess for providing technical support for today's webinar, as well as Julie Reese and Vicki Grzinski in the ALCTS office. Our technical support experts always make it possible to present these webinars smoothly. Information about all ALCTS continuing education offerings can be found on the website under Online Learning. I've posted some of the webinars that are coming up this fall, including a 4-part series on MOOCs and libraries. Most of the web courses for the fall have sold out, but there are still some spaces left. I've listed the sessions and courses that still have some limited availability through the end of the year. So thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we hope that you'll participate in other ALCTS continuing education events in the future.